The steam from the industrial sink hit his face like it did every night. Hot water, greasy plates, and the endless clatter of pots and pans. This was life for 28-year-old David, and honestly, he'd gotten used to it. 3 years washing dishes at an upscale Italian restaurant in Seattle. 3 years of being invisible. People don't really see dishwashers, do they? The servers would rush past him with stacks of dirty plates, barely making eye contact. The chefs were too busy shouting orders and plating fancy dishes to notice the guy in the back, keeping everything clean. And the customers? Well, they had no idea he even existed. He was just part of the background noise, like the hum of the refrigerators or the buzz of the overhead lights. David didn't mind being invisible most days. It gave him time to think, time to remember, time to hear the music that was always playing in his head. See, David had a secret, a big one, something nobody at the restaurant knew about, not even after 3 years of working alongside the same people every single day. He'd grown up in a tiny apartment in Beijing, right above a music school. Not inside it, mind you, above it. His family couldn't afford to send him there. They could barely afford rent, but every evening, like clockwork, the sounds would drift up through the thin floors. Piano scales, violin pieces, sometimes full orchestras practicing together. While other kids were outside playing basketball or video games, David would lie on the floor of his bedroom, ear pressed against the old wooden boards, just listening. He'd never forget the first time he heard Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata coming through those floorboards. He was 7 years old and something inside him just woke up. It was like the music was speaking a language he somehow already understood. He couldn't explain it to his parents. How do you tell someone that sounds are turning into colors in your mind? That melodies are telling you stories without any words? His mother worked double shifts at a textile factory. His father fixed bicycles on the street corner 12 hours a day. There was no money for piano lessons. No money for a real instrument. But his mother saw something in his eyes when he talked about the music. So one Sunday she took him to the street market and bought him a keyboard. It was old, scratched up, and half the keys stuck when you pressed them. But to David it was everything. He taught himself to play. No teacher, no sheet music, no proper training. He'd listen to the students practicing downstairs, memorize what he heard, then try to recreate it on his broken keyboard. When he made mistakes, he'd figure out why they sounded wrong and fix them. When he got something right, he'd build on it. His fingers learned to move on their own, finding patterns and possibilities. By the time he was 12, he could play pieces that students twice his age were struggling with at the conservatory below. His mother would smile and say he was blessed with a gift. His father would shake his head in worry, saying gifts don't pay bills. They were both right in their own way. Then everything changed. David was 16 when his parents made the decision to move to America. Better opportunities, they said. A chance for a real future. They sold everything they owned, said goodbye to everyone they knew, and got on a plane to Seattle. The American dream, they called it. But dreams cost money, and money meant work. Any work, all work. His father took a job at a car wash. His mother cleaned office buildings at night. And David? Well, David needed to help too. There was no time for music anymore. No time for dreams about concert halls and grand pianos. There were bills to pay and a new language to learn and a whole life to build from nothing. He got his first job at 17, washing dishes at a small diner. Then another restaurant. Then another. 12 years later, here he was, still scrubbing pots, still invisible, still just getting by. But here's the thing about music. Real music that gets inside you when you're young. It doesn't just go away. It can't. It becomes part of how you think, how you breathe, how you exist in the world. So while David's hands scrubbed and rinsed and stacked, his mind was somewhere else entirely. He was composing, creating, building entire symphonies that nobody would ever hear. Every shift at the restaurant was like this. His body was on autopilot, doing the physical work it had done thousands of times before, but his mind was free. Free to experiment with melodies, free to imagine chord progressions, free to be the musician he never got the chance to become. Sometimes his coworker, an older guy named Tom, would catch him humming. "You're always making those sounds, man," Tom would say with a laugh. "You should have been a singer or something." David would just smile and shrug. How could he explain? How could he tell Tom that he wasn't just humming? He was working through the third movement of an original piece he'd been composing in his head for 6 months. Or there was Rachel, one of the servers, who'd sometimes see him tapping rhythms on the steel counter with his fingers. Complex patterns, precise timing, the kind of thing that took years of training to do naturally. But to her, it just looked like nervous energy. "You okay back here?" she'd ask. "You seem stressed." And he'd nod and say he was fine, and she'd rush back to her tables, never knowing she'd just witnessed something remarkable. The kitchen at La Bella Notte was hot and loud and exhausting. The head chef, Mr. Antonio, ran the place like a military operation. Everything had to be perfect. The timing, the presentation, the temperature. One mistake and you'd hear about it for a week. It was high pressure, high stress, and honestly, most people didn't last more than a few months, but David stayed. Not because he loved washing dishes. Not because the pay was good, it wasn't. He stayed because something about the chaos felt familiar. The rhythm of service. The way everyone had to work together like an orchestra, each person playing their part. The dishwashing station was his instrument in a strange way, and he'd gotten pretty good at playing it. Friday nights were always the busiest. The dining room would be packed with people celebrating birthdays, anniversaries, promotions. Rich people mostly, the kind who could drop $200 on dinner without thinking twice about it. David would watch them sometimes through the small window in the kitchen door. The way they laughed and drank expensive wine and lived lives that seemed so different from his own, he didn't feel jealous exactly. More like curious. What would it be like to be on the other side of that door, to be seen, to be heard, to share the music that had been trapped inside him for so many years? But those were dangerous thoughts for a dishwasher to have, so he'd push them away, turn back to his sink and let the hot water wash over his hands. Just another Friday night. Just another shift. Just another day of being invisible. He had no idea that everything was about to change, that in just a few hours he'd make a choice that would put him in front of all those people, that his secret would become impossible to hide, that the music living in his head would finally find its way out into the world. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. For now, David was just a dishwasher. Nothing more, nothing less. At least that's what everyone thought. That Friday started like any other. David clocked in at 4 in the afternoon, tied on his apron, and took his position at the sink. The dinner rush wouldn't hit for another hour, but prep work meant dirty bowls, cutting boards, and mixing containers were already piling up. Mr. Antonio was in one of his moods, barking orders, criticizing the sauce consistency, making one of the new line cooks redo an entire batch of pasta. David had learned to keep his head down on days like this, do the work, stay quiet, get through the shift. But around 5:30, the energy in the kitchen shifted. Rachel came bursting through the door with the excited look on her face. "Big party tonight, everyone. VIP reservation. Mr. Antonio, the owner, wants everything perfect." Mr. Antonio wiped his hands on his apron. "How big?" 20 people. Private section. It's a birthday party for someone important. Some kind of food critic or journalist, I think. They're bringing in a piano player and everything." A piano player. David felt something flutter in his chest. He hadn't seen a real piano in years. Not up close, anyway. Sometimes he'd walk past the music store downtown and stare through the window at the grand pianos on display. But he never went inside. What was the point? Those instruments weren't for people like him. The evening picked up speed after that. The dining room started filling up and orders began flying in. David fell into his rhythm, hands moving automatically while his mind wandered. He could hear the muffled sounds of the restaurant beyond the kitchen door. Laughter, glasses clinking, the usual Friday night atmosphere. Then around 7 o'clock he heard it. Piano music, soft at first, barely audible over the kitchen noise. But David's ears were trained to pick up music the way a wolf picks up a scent. He paused, a soapy plate in his hands, and listened. It was Chopin. Nocturne in E-flat major. One of the pieces he used to listen to through the floorboards back in Beijing. One of the first pieces he'd taught himself to play on that broken keyboard. Without thinking, David moved toward the kitchen door. The small window gave him a narrow view of the dining room. He could see them now. The private party. Well-dressed people sitting around a long table near the windows. And there, positioned perfectly to catch the evening light, was a beautiful black grand piano. The pianist was an older man in a tuxedo, his fingers moving across the keys. But something was off. David could hear it immediately. The timing was wrong. The dynamics were all over the place. Notes that should have been soft and delicate were being hammered too hard. The whole piece felt rushed, like the pianist was in a hurry to get it over with. Tom came up beside him. "What are you looking at?" "The piano player," David said quietly. Tom squinted through the window. "Looks fancy. Bet he charges a fortune to play at these things." David didn't respond. He was too focused on the music, or rather, what the music was supposed to be. Every wrong note felt like a small cut. Every rushed phrase made him wince. It was like watching someone beautiful being treated carelessly. The Chopin piece ended, and David could see some polite applause from the party guests. The pianist stood up, gave a small bow, and then David saw him reach for something, a glass. He drank from it, then reached for another glass on top of the piano. "Wine, probably. Maybe champagne." "Get back to work, both of you," Mr. Antonio snapped from behind them. "Those plates aren't going to wash themselves." David returned to his station, but he kept listening. The pianist started another piece. Debussy this time. Clair de Lune. Another one of David's favorites. Another piece being butchered by someone who clearly wasn't taking it seriously. 30 minutes passed. The kitchen was in full chaos now. Orders coming in rapid fire. Chef shouting, pans clanging, the whole controlled disaster that was Friday night service. But even through all that noise, David could hear the piano. And he could hear that something was going very, very wrong. The music was getting worse. Sloppier. The pianist was hitting wrong keys now, not just playing poorly, but actually missing notes entirely. David heard a crash of dissonant chords that made him flinch. That definitely wasn't part of any song. Then Rachel burst through the kitchen door again, but this time her face wasn't excited. She looked horrified. "Mr. Antonio, the piano player is drunk." Everything in the kitchen stopped. Even the head chef went silent. "What do you mean, drunk?" Mr. Antonio demanded. "I mean drunk. He's stumbling through the songs, hitting wrong notes everywhere. The birthday lady looks furious. Her guests are starting to whisper. It's a disaster out there." Mr. Antonio threw down his kitchen towel and stormed toward the dining room. David and half the kitchen staff crowded around the door to watch. Through the window, they could see the pianist swaying slightly on the bench, his fingers fumbling across the keys. The well-dressed guests were exchanging uncomfortable glances. One woman, sitting at the head of the table with a birthday tiara on her head, had her arms crossed and her lips pressed into a thin line. She did not look happy. Mr. Antonio reached the piano just as the pianist hit another catastrophically wrong chord. There was a brief, heated conversation that David couldn't hear. Then Mr. Antonio was taking the pianist by the arm, helping him up from the bench and guiding him firmly toward a side exit. The pianist was protesting, gesturing wildly, but Mr. Antonio wasn't having it. The piano sat empty. The party guests sat in awkward silence, and David felt his heart starting to pound. Mr. Antonio came rushing back into the kitchen, his face red with stress and anger. "Does anyone here play piano?" he demanded, looking around at his staff. "Anyone at all?" Silence. The line cooks looked at each other. The servers shook their heads. Tom shrugged helplessly. "Nobody?" Mr. Antonio's voice was rising. "We have 20 people out there, including one of the most influential food critics in Seattle, and we just kicked out the entertainment." More silence. David felt like his chest was going to explode. His hands were gripping the edge of the sink so hard his knuckles had gone white. The music in his head was screaming at him. All those years of listening, learning, practicing in secret. All those compositions he'd created in his mind while washing dishes. All that talent that nobody knew about. This was insane. He was a dishwasher. These were important people. Rich people. Educated people. What was he even thinking? But that piano was sitting there empty. And he knew. He absolutely knew that he could play it better than the drunk guy in the tuxedo. He knew he could play things that would make people stop talking and just listen. Really listen. His mother's voice echoed in his memory. "You have a gift." And his father's voice answering, "Gifts don't pay bills." Well, maybe not. But right now a gift might save the day. David took a deep breath. His hands were shaking. His mouth was dry. Every logical part of his brain was screaming at him to stay quiet, to stay invisible, to stay safe in his little corner of the kitchen, where nobody expected anything from him. But for once in 12 years, he didn't listen to the logical part of his brain. He dried his hands on his apron. "I can play," he heard himself say. The words came out so quietly that at first nobody heard him. The kitchen staff was still looking at each other. Mr. Antonio was running his hands through his hair in frustration. David cleared his throat. Louder this time. I can play piano. Every head in the kitchen turned to look at him. Tom's mouth fell open. Rachel looked confused. Mr. Antonio stared at him like he'd just announced he could fly. You? Mr. Antonio said. You play piano? David nodded, not trusting his voice anymore. How well? That was the question, wasn't it? How did you explain years of secret practice? How did you tell someone that music was as natural to you as breathing, even though you'd never played for anyone, never studied formally, never even touched a real grand piano? Well enough, David finally said. Mr. Antonio looked at him for a long moment. David could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. The owner was probably going to fire him for this disaster. The critic was probably going to write a terrible review. What did they have to lose? Okay, Mr. Antonio said. Okay, go out there. David's heart nearly stopped. What? Go. Play something, anything. Just keep those people happy until I figure out what to do next. This was really happening. David untied his apron with trembling fingers. His uniform underneath was stained and wrinkled. His shoes were the non-slip kind with worn soles. He probably smelled like dish soap and kitchen grease, but he was about to walk out there and sit at that piano. Tom grabbed his shoulder as he headed for the door.
Hey man, I didn't know you could play.
That's amazing. David managed a weak smile. Neither did anyone else. He pushed through the kitchen door and stepped into the dining room. Into the light. Into a world he'd only ever watched from the other side of a window. Every eye in the room turned to look at him. The dishwasher in his stained clothes, walking toward a piano worth more than he made in a year. This was either going to be the best decision he'd ever made or the most embarrassing moment of his life. He sat down at the bench and placed his fingers on the keys. And for the first time in 12 years, David stopped being invisible. The piano bench was different than David had imagined. Smoother, more solid. He'd spent years picturing this moment in his head, but nothing prepared him for the actual weight of it. The real thing, a real grand piano under his fingers. He could feel everyone staring at him. 20 pairs of eyes, probably wondering what on earth the restaurant was thinking, sending out a dishwasher to save their fancy party. He caught a glimpse of the birthday woman, the critic, her eyebrow raised in obvious skepticism. Her expression said it all. Really? This is the best they could do? David's hands were still damp from the sink. They left small marks on the pristine white keys. His heart was hammering so hard he thought the people at the nearest table might actually hear it. For a second he almost got up. Almost apologized and walked back to the kitchen where he belonged. This was crazy. These people paid good money for professional entertainment, not some dishwasher with a secret hobby. But then his fingers found their position. The position they'd held thousands of times in his mind, and something inside him settled. Just a little. Just enough. He wasn't going to play Chopin. He wasn't going to try to recreate what the drunk pianist had been butchering. That wasn't why he was here. If he was going to do this, if he was really going to expose himself like this after 12 years of hiding, then he was going to play something real. Something his. He closed his eyes and let his fingers press down on the keys. The first notes came out soft, gentle, like a question being asked in the dark. It was a melody he'd been working on in his head for the past 6 months. He called it the in-between because that's what it was about. That space between who you used to be and who you're trying to become, between dreams and reality, between silence and sound. His left hand joined in, creating a foundation underneath the melody. The rhythm was steady like a heartbeat, like the sound of water running in a sink, like the pulse of a city that never stops moving. The dining room had gone completely quiet. David kept his eyes closed. If he looked at them, at their faces, at their expensive clothes and their judgment, he might stop. He might remember that he was nobody, that he had no right to be here. So he focused on the music instead. Let it carry him away from the restaurant, from the fear, from everything except this moment. His right hand climbed higher up the keyboard, the notes becoming more urgent, more insistent. This was the part about struggle, about working jobs that made your back ache and your hands raw, about being invisible in a world full of people who never really looked at you. The melody twisted and turned, finding tension, building pressure, but then it shifted, softened. Because struggle wasn't the whole story, was it? There was also hope. Quiet, stubborn hope that refused to die no matter how many years passed. The kind of hope that made a 7-year-old boy press his ear to the floor just to hear music. The kind that made him teach himself to play on broken keys. The kind that somehow survived 12 years of dish soap and invisibility. The music began to build again, but differently this time. Not with tension, but with possibility. With the idea that maybe, just maybe, the in-between space wasn't a place you got stuck. Maybe it was a place you gathered strength. A place you became something more than you were before. David's fingers were flying now, both hands working together in complex patterns that he'd practiced only in his imagination. The melody was dancing with the harmony, chasing each other, playing off each other, telling a story without any words at all. He thought about his mother working those double shifts at the textile factory, his father fixing bicycles in the freezing Beijing winters, the sacrifices they'd made so he could be here in America, in Seattle, washing dishes in a fancy Italian restaurant. They'd given up everything for a better life, and what had he done? Hidden his gift, buried his talent under years of playing it safe. The music swelled. This was for them, for every immigrant parent who worked themselves to exhaustion so their kids could have chances they never had, for every person who gave up their own dreams so someone else could dream bigger. The melody reached its highest point, a moment of pure, clear truth, and then began to descend, not falling but settling, finding peace. The resolution came gradually like a sunset, the notes spreading out and slowing down until finally, gently, his fingers pressed the last chord. Silence. David kept his eyes closed for 1 more second, 2 seconds, 3. Then he opened them. The birthday woman was staring at him with her mouth slightly open. The man next to her had his wine glass frozen halfway to his lips. A woman at the far end of the table had tears on her cheeks. Actual tears. Nobody was moving. Nobody was breathing. The entire room felt suspended in time. And then the applause started. It wasn't the polite, obligatory clapping you give to someone just to be nice. This was different. Real. The birthday woman started it, standing up from her chair, her hands coming together in loud, sharp claps. Then the man next to her stood. Then another person. Then another. Within seconds, all 20 guests were on their feet, applauding like they'd just witnessed something they couldn't quite believe. David felt his face getting hot. He didn't know what to do with his hands. He'd never played for anyone before, let alone received a standing ovation. His brain couldn't process it. Through the kitchen window, he could see the entire staff crowded together watching. Tom was grinning like an idiot. Rachel had her hands over her mouth. Even Mr. Antonio looked stunned. The birthday woman was walking toward him now. David stood up quickly from the bench, suddenly very aware of his stained shirt and worn shoes. She was elegant, probably in her 50s, with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through people. The kind of person who'd spent a lifetime evaluating and judging and critiquing. That was extraordinary, she said. Her voice was quiet but firm. "What's your name?" "David," he managed to say. "David Chen. I'm Catherine." "Catherine Price." She extended her hand and he shook it, hoping his palm wasn't too sweaty. "I write restaurant reviews and cultural pieces for the Seattle Tribune." "That piece you just played, I've never heard it before. Who composed it?" David swallowed hard. "I did." Her eyebrows shot up. "You wrote that?" He nodded. "Where did you study? Juilliard, Berkeley, somewhere in Europe?" "I didn't. I'm self-taught. I learned by listening when I was a kid in China. I've never had formal training." Catherine stared at him for a long moment. Then she looked down at his clothes, really looked at them, probably noticing the food stains and the worn fabric for the first time. "And you work here?" "In the kitchen. I wash dishes," David said simply. There was no point in hiding it now. She laughed. Not a mean laugh, but one of genuine disbelief. "You wash dishes? A completely self-taught pianist who can compose and perform at this level washes dishes?" "It pays the bills," David said, echoing his father's old words. Catherine shook her head slowly. "That piece you played. The emotion in it. The technical skill. Do you understand how rare that is? I've been covering arts and culture in this city for 25 years. I've heard hundreds of pianists, many with fancy degrees and impressive credentials. What you just did, that was better than most of them." David didn't know what to say to that. Part of him wanted to believe her. Part of him thought she was just being nice because she felt bad about the drunk pianist ruining her party. I'm serious, Catherine continued, as if reading his thoughts. You have genuine talent. The kind that shouldn't be wasted in a kitchen, no offense. None taken, David said quietly. One of her guests called out from the table, Catherine, get his contact information. We need to hear more. Another voice joined in. Play something else. Yes, please, one more song. Catherine smiled at him. What do you say? Can you give us one more? Or do you need to get back to work? David glanced at the kitchen door. Mr. Antonio was standing there now, visible through the window. But instead of looking angry or impatient, he was nodding. Actually nodding. Giving permission, I can play one more, David said. The guests cheered as he sat back down at the piano. This time he wasn't as nervous. His hands found the keys with confidence. He decided to play something different. Something lighter. A piece he'd composed during the spring, inspired by watching cherry blossoms fall in a park near his apartment. As his fingers moved across the keys, as the music filled the restaurant, David realized something. For 12 years he'd convinced himself that hiding was safer, that playing it small was the smart choice, that people like him, immigrants with no credentials and no connections, needed to be grateful for whatever work they could get, and not ask for more. But maybe his father had been wrong. Maybe gifts weren't just about paying bills. Maybe they were about something bigger, about sharing something beautiful with the world, about not letting fear turn you into a smaller version of yourself. The song ended with a cascade of bright notes like petals falling through sunlight. The applause came again, enthusiastic and warm. Catherine was already pulling out her phone. I'm writing about this, she said firmly. About you. This story needs to be told. David smiled, and for the first time in a very long time he let himself feel something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. David didn't sleep that night. How could he? He kept replaying the evening in his mind. The applause. Catherine's words. The way those wealthy, educated people had looked at him like he was someone worth seeing. He'd gone back to the kitchen after his second song, expecting to finish his shift at the sink. But Mr. Antonio had just waved him off. Go home, David. You've done enough for tonight. There was something different in his voice. Respect, maybe. Or surprise. Whatever it was, it felt strange. The next morning, David woke up to 17 missed calls on his phone. 17. He never got calls. His phone was basically just an alarm clock that occasionally received spam texts. Most of them were from numbers he didn't recognize. But there was one from the restaurant and one from a number with a note that said, Catherine Price, Seattle Tribune. His hands shook as he called Catherine back. David! I'm so glad you called. She sounded energized, excited. Listen, I worked late last night. I couldn't get what you did out of my head. I wrote a column about it. A column? David's voice came out scratchy. He hadn't talked to anyone yet this morning. It's publishing today. Tuesday edition. Front page of the arts section. I hope that's okay. I know I should have asked first, but honestly I was so moved by what happened that I just started writing and couldn't stop. David sat down on his bed. Front page of the arts section. In the Seattle Tribune. About him. A dishwasher. What did you write? He asked nervously. The truth. About a self-taught immigrant with extraordinary talent working an invisible job, while the rest of us go to concerts and pay hundreds of dollars to hear musicians who aren't half as gifted. About how we, and I mean all of us, critics and audiences and the whole classical music establishment, have become so obsessed with credentials and pedigree that we miss the real artists hiding right in front of us. David didn't know what to say. That sounded like a lot. Like maybe too much. I called it the dishwasher who outplayed concert pianists, Catherine continued. I wanted people to understand what I witnessed last night. What we all witnessed. After they hung up, David just sat there for a while, staring at his phone. Part of him was excited. Part of him was terrified. What would this mean? Would people actually read it? Would they care? He found out the answer faster than he expected. By noon, his phone was ringing constantly. News stations. Radio shows. Other newspapers wanting to do their own stories. A local TV station wanted to interview him. Someone from the mayor's office called to congratulate him. It was overwhelming. Tom texted him around 1 in the afternoon. Dude, you're famous. Channel 5 just did a segment about you. They showed a picture of the restaurant and everything. This is insane. David turned on his TV and found a news channel. Sure enough, within 20 minutes, they ran a story. Local dishwasher stuns dinner party with hidden musical talent. They showed a photo that someone had taken at the restaurant. David at the piano, his eyes closed, completely lost in the music. He barely recognized himself. His mother called next, crying. Your aunt in California sent me the article. She saw it online. David, the whole family is reading about you. Your father, he won't stop smiling.
He says he always knew.
He says he's sorry for what he said about gifts and bills. David felt his own eyes getting wet. Tell him I understand. He was trying to protect me. You both were. We just wanted you to survive, his mother said. We didn't want America to break your heart like it breaks so many immigrants' hearts. But maybe we were wrong to make you hide who you are. By Wednesday, the story had gone viral. Actually viral. People were sharing Catherine's article all over social media. Musicians were commenting on it. Other critics were writing response pieces. Some agreed with Catherine. Some argued that technique and training mattered more than raw talent. But everyone was talking about it. The restaurant's phone was ringing off the hook with reservation requests. People wanted to eat there, hoping they might hear David play. Mr. Antonio called him Wednesday afternoon. David, I have a proposal. What if you didn't wash dishes anymore? What if you played piano instead? During dinner service. I'd pay you more. Double what you make now. Double. That was real money. That was enough to maybe take some actual piano lessons, to buy some sheet music, to start building something. I'd like that, David said. But the really life-changing call came on Thursday. Is this David Chen? A woman's voice, professional and warm, yes? My name is Dr. Helen Park. I'm the Director of Community Music Education at the Seattle Symphony. I read about you in the Tribune, and I watched the video someone posted online, the one from the restaurant. David's heart jumped. Someone had recorded him. There was a video online? I want to offer you something, Dr. Park continued. We have a program for gifted musicians who didn't have access to traditional training. It's a full scholarship, private lessons with our top instructors, access to practice spaces, performance opportunities, everything. We created it specifically for talented people who fell through the cracks of the conventional music education system. David couldn't speak. Would you be interested? Dr. Park asked. I should mention, one of our teachers is a pianist named Robert Kim. He's performed at Carnegie Hall, taught at Juilliard, and he specifically called me after reading your story. He wants to work with you. Why? David finally managed to ask. Why would someone like that want to teach someone like me? Dr. Park laughed gently. David, you don't understand what you are yet. But you will. Real musicianship, the kind you demonstrated at that restaurant, is incredibly rare. Technical skill can be taught. Feeling can't. You have both. That combination is special. David accepted on the spot. How could he not? The next few weeks were a blur. The restaurant threw him a farewell party. They insisted on it even though David felt embarrassed by all the attention. The staff had chipped in to buy him a gift. When he opened it, he actually had to sit down. It was a professional digital piano. Not a cheap one. A real quality instrument with weighted keys and everything. We all knew you were too good for dishwashing, Rachel said, wiping her eyes. We just didn't know you were too good for all of us. Tom gave him a long hug. You better not forget us when you're playing in fancy concert halls. Even Mr. Antonio got emotional. You know what the crazy thing is? You were the best dishwasher I ever had. Always on time, never complained, did excellent work. And the whole time, we had a genius in the kitchen and didn't even know it. David's first day at the Seattle Symphony building felt like stepping into a different universe. The practice rooms had beautiful pianos perfectly maintained. The hallways echoed with music, different instruments and voices blending together. Everyone here was a serious musician. Everyone here had dedicated their lives to this craft. Robert Kim was in his 60s with gray hair and kind eyes. When they met, he shook David's hand firmly. Play something for me. Anything you want. David sat at the grand piano in the practice room. He played the piece from the restaurant. The in-between. When he finished, Robert was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, You have bad habits. Your posture isn't quite right. Your fingering is inefficient in places. Your pedal work needs refinement. David's heart sank. Of course, he was self-taught. He probably looked like an amateur to someone with real training. But then Robert smiled. However, you understand music in a way that most of my formally trained students never will. They learn the rules, the techniques, the proper methods. But you? You learn by feeling, by listening. by necessity. That's given you something precious, an authentic voice. So what do? David asked. We teach you the technical skills without killing the soul that makes you special. It's a delicate balance. Some musicians spend so much time learning the rules that they forget why they fell in love with music in the first place. You won't have that problem. Your challenge will be different. Over the next few months, David practiced more than he'd ever practiced in his life. 6, 7, 8 hours a day. His fingers developed new calluses. His back ached from sitting at the piano bench. But it was a different kind of ache than the one from standing at the sink. This ache meant something. Robert taught him proper technique. Efficient hand positions. How to use his whole body, not just his fingers. How to conserve energy for long performances. All the things that professional pianists learned in childhood, David was learning now at 28. But he was a quick learner. Years of teaching himself had made him good at observing, analyzing, adapting. What might take another student months to master, David could often grasp in weeks. Catherine kept writing about his progress. She'd come to some of his practice sessions with David's permission and publish updates. The dishwasher's journey continues, her columns would say. People followed along. They were invested now. They wanted to see him succeed. 6 months after that Friday night at the restaurant, Dr. Park approached David with an offer. We're planning a community concert series, showcasing non-traditional musicians, people who found their way to classical music through unconventional paths. We'd like you to be the featured performer for the opening night. Performing where? David asked. Benaroya Hall, our main concert venue. Benaroya Hall. David had walked past that building 100 times, looking up at its glass walls, imagining. The night before the concert, David couldn't eat. His stomach was tied in knots. He'd performed at small gatherings over the past few months, practice recitals with other students, nothing major. But this was different. Benaroya Hall seated over 2,000 people. 2,000? The tickets had sold out in 3 days. Robert had called him that afternoon. Remember, they're not coming to judge you. They're coming because they want to see you succeed. They're on your side, easy for him to say. Robert had performed hundreds of concerts. For David, this was everything. This was proof that the last 9 months hadn't been some kind of dream. That a dishwasher really could become a concert pianist. That people like him, people with no credentials or connections or money, could still make it. The pressure felt enormous. His mother had flown in from the East Coast, where she'd moved to be closer to his aunt. His father had taken time off from the car wash, probably the first time he'd missed work in years. They were staying in his tiny apartment, sleeping on an air mattress in the living room, and David had never been so grateful for anything in his life. That evening, his father sat next to him on the couch. They'd never been the type for long conversations. His father was a man of few words, someone who showed love through actions, not speeches. I was wrong, his father said quietly. What I said about gifts not paying bills. I was trying to protect you, but I was wrong. You weren't wrong, Dad. You were being realistic, practical. His father shook his head. No, I was being afraid. Afraid that if you hoped for too much, America would crush you like it crushed so many of us. But you know what I realized? We didn't come here so you could play it safe. We came here so you could have chances we never had. And you hiding your music, that wasn't survival. That was just fear. David felt his throat tighten. Tomorrow you go up on that stage and you show them who you really are, not who you think you should be. Not what society says a dishwasher should become. You show them the boy who learned piano by pressing his ear to the floor. You show them every year you spent hiding. And then you show them that none of it was wasted, that it all led here. They sat in silence for a while. Then his father added, I'm proud of you. I should have said it sooner. I should have said it every day. But I'm saying it now. I'm so proud I could burst. David hugged his father and they both cried a little, though neither of them mentioned it. The next day arrived too quickly. David put on the suit that Dr. Park had helped him pick out. A real suit, tailored to fit properly. Nothing like the borrowed clothes he'd worn to practice sessions. He looked in the mirror and barely recognized himself. He looked like a concert pianist. Now he just had to play like one. Backstage at Benaroya Hall was controlled chaos. Musicians warming up, staff checking equipment, directors going over last-minute details. David found a quiet corner and sat at a practice piano, letting his fingers run through scales. Keeping loose, staying focused. Tom and Rachel had texted him good luck messages. Mr. Antonio had sent flowers to the venue. Catherine had written one final column that morning, titled Tonight. We witness a transformation. Even some of the line cooks from the restaurant had bought tickets. Dr. Park found him 20 minutes before showtime. How are you feeling? Terrified, David admitted. She smiled. Good, that means you care. The day you stop being nervous is the day you stop taking it seriously. She paused. David, whatever happens tonight, you've already won. You've already proved that talent doesn't need permission. That art doesn't belong only to people who can afford conservatory tuition. You've inspired more people in 9 months than most musicians do in a lifetime. But what if I mess up? What if I freeze? What if I'm not good enough? Then you mess up. Then you freeze. Then you prove you're human. Dr. Park squeezed his shoulder. But I don't think that's going to happen. I've watched you practice. I've seen your growth. You're ready for this. Robert appeared next wearing a tuxedo. I'm sitting front row center. When you walk out there and you feel nervous, find my face. I'll be the guy nodding at you like a proud father, because that's exactly how I feel. Then it was time. David stood in the wings listening to Dr. Park introduce him to the audience. She told his story, the whole story. The boy listening through floorboards in Beijing. The broken keyboard from the street market. The years washing dishes while music lived silently in his head. The drunk pianist and the improvised performance that changed everything. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Park's voice rang out. Please welcome David Chen. The applause was deafening. David walked onto the stage and the lights hit him like a physical force. The hall was massive, every seat filled. Faces upon faces upon faces, all looking at him, all waiting. He found Robert in the front row, exactly where he said he'd be, nodding with that proud smile. He found his parents, his mother already dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. He found Tom and Rachel grinning like crazy people. He found Catherine, her phone out, probably taking notes for yet another article. He sat at the grand piano, the same kind of piano he used to dream about as a kid, the kind he thought people like him would never get to play. He placed his hands on the keys and took one deep breath. Then he began to play. He started with the In Between, the piece that had started everything at the restaurant, but it had evolved over the months of practice. It was tighter now, more refined, yet somehow even more emotional. Every note carried the weight of his journey. Every phrase told a story. The audience was completely silent. That special kind of silence that meant people were truly listening, really hearing what he was trying to say. He moved into his second piece, something new he'd composed specifically for tonight. He called it Visible. It was about transformation, about stepping out of shadows, about becoming the person you were always meant to be. His fingers flew across the keys with confidence that had taken months to build. All of Robert's technical training was there. The efficiency, the proper form, the control. But underneath it all was still him. Still the self-taught kid who learned by feeling. Still the dishwasher who heard music in the rhythm of running water. The piece built to a powerful climax. His hands moving in perfect synchronization, the melody soaring above the harmony like a bird finally learning it could fly. Then it resolved, settling into a peaceful conclusion that felt like coming home. The final note rang out across the hall, clear and true. For 3 full seconds, there was complete silence. Then the entire audience erupted. People weren't just clapping. They were on their feet shouting, cheering. His mother was openly sobbing. His father had his arm around her, his face showing more emotion than David had ever seen. Robert was applauding with his hands raised high. Tom was whistling. Catherine was wiping her eyes while trying to type on her phone. David stood and took a bow, and the applause somehow got even louder. But what hit him hardest was seeing the other people in the audience. Regular people, working people, people who looked like they might have their own invisible jobs, their own hidden talents, their own dreams they'd been too afraid to chase. They were clapping the hardest of all, because this wasn't just his story. It was their story too. After the concert, there was a reception. People lined up to talk to him, to shake his hand, to take photos. A representative from a record label gave him a business card. A concert promoter wanted to discuss a tour. 3 different music schools offered him teaching positions. But the moment that mattered most came from a young woman, maybe 19 or 20, who approached him nervously. I'm a waitress, she said quietly. I write poetry at night, but I've never shown anyone. I've always been too scared, too worried people would think I'm not a real writer, because I don't have a degree. But watching you tonight, I realized something. If you can do this, maybe I can try too. Maybe I can stop hiding. David felt tears in his eyes. You should try. You absolutely should. Don't wait as long as I did. She thanked him and walked away, and David understood something profound. This was bigger than music, bigger than one dishwasher's unlikely journey. This was about everyone who'd ever felt invisible, everyone who'd ever been told their dreams were impractical, everyone who'd ever hidden their light because the world made them believe they didn't deserve to shine. Later that night, back in his apartment, still wearing his concert suit, David sat at his digital piano, the one his former co-workers had given him. He played quietly, just for himself, working through a new melody that was forming in his mind. His parents were asleep in the living room. The city was quiet outside his window, and for the first time in his life, David felt completely at peace with who he was. He wasn't just a dishwasher anymore, but he also wasn't ashamed of ever having been one. Every plate he'd scrubbed, every shift he'd worked, every year he'd spent invisible had shaped him, made him who he needed to be for this moment. Some stories have fairy tale endings, some have tragic endings. David's story had a real ending, the kind where you don't suddenly become perfect or rich or famous overnight, the kind where you still have to work hard, still have doubts, still face challenges, but you face them as yourself, fully yourself, not hiding anymore. And that, David realized as his fingers found a beautiful new chord progression, was the greatest transformation of all. Not from dishwasher to pianist, from invisible to seen.